The simulation hypothesis is kind of easy to agree on after a couple deductive guesses. So you guys want to go through it and see if you're a simulation hypothesist? That's what Elon Musk is. All right, first question. Just silently answer these. Do you think it's probable that our descendants will have computational power that is vast compared to ours today? Presume the answer is probably. Okay, next question. Will that vast ability to simulate worlds result in any of them doing 2 or more high-fidelity or hyper-realistic ancestor or origin simulations that include fully realistic physics? Presume the answer is sure. It's probably true that at least 2 out of countless trillions of our descendants spread across every imaginable region of time and space will use their advanced abilities to do origin simulations. Deducted conclusion. In Elon Musk's words, we're probably living in a simulation. In my words, it is more probable than not that we are in one of the simulated realities versus being so lucky we happen to be in the one real reality. Any physical theory requires unknowable guesses about certain other aspects of reality called physical axioms, which are just unprovable assumptions. This is also the case in mathematical statements where we cannot prove a math theorem without first choosing some unprovable starting assumption. The philosophical guess or assumption that you just deduced with me about the probability of the simulation hypothesis is that the philosophy of materialism is true. Without thinking about it, you had a hidden assumption that the axiom or the philosophy of materialism is true. It's in how we answered the questions together. You accidentally presumed reality is not made of information, but is instead made of some substance that behaves like information and can be describable by information. You philosophically decided that matter, energy, space, or time are distinctly not information because you accepted the deduction that we are unlikely to be in the one material or real reality that runs the simulation. So you defaulted to a materialism philosophy without even thinking about it. So by definition, Elon Musk's philosophy is materialism because he believes in the simulation hypothesis. He thinks he's in the simulation made of information, and he thinks that is a simulation being run in some real reality made of space-time and energy. So let's drill down into what this philosophy of materialism is and how it got to be so ingrained in us that we don't even question it. It's actually a religious type of philosophy in rudimentary form, like I mentioned. Religious ideas contend that a non-physical consciousness called God was in a good mood at one point, so he, and it usually is a he, created physicality, the material world around us. So in those viewpoints, frameworks, you're not allowed to ask who or what created God because the answer will be, well, he just is and always was. So have faith, my child, and stop asking questions like that. In the religion or mythos of materialism philosophy, you are not allowed to ask what created physical energy. If you do, the answer will be, the Big Bang just happened. It was this energy in a point that just was and always will be. So have faith, my child, and don't ask questions that can't be answered. The answer to what created energy in the religion of materialism is therefore, well, nothing created it. It just is and always was. The answer to what created God, the creator of physical energy, in most religions other than the religion of materialism is, well, nothing created it. It just is and always was. There is a more modern viewpoint which rejects the old idea that there is this stuff that just is called energy, space, and time. Instead, this newer viewpoint is more conservative, actually, and critical. It opts for an answer most strongly implied by the mathematics and the experiments behind quantum mechanics, a picture where there is no stuff called physicality or energy. There is only information. Energy, space, and time, in that viewpoint, that more modern viewpoint, is information. But let's not let that viewpoint there off the hook so easily. We can ask those more modern people a question. All right, fine. Well, then where did this information come from? And please don't tell me that it just is, because that would be like what the religious people say. And their answer will be, it just is. The information just is. Have faith and don't ask that question again. So let's take you through the self-simulation hypothesis deduction. Whether or not you believe this more conservative viewpoint that energy is information, let's just take it as a hypothetical so that we can explore this deduction together. So, question 1, can a sufficiently vast collective descendant consciousness from the future mentally simulate a reality like ours, including the emergence of itself, the simulator or thinker? Because some of our most realistic dreams are far higher resolution than our very best computer simulations, we can certainly answer like this. Okay, sure, yes, if such a vast consciousness could indeed occur in the future, then it can have arbitrarily realistic simulations of reality, and it could even simulate itself in principle. Question number 2, can a consciousness evolve to be far greater than our own consciousness? And could it exist in new forms via something like quantum entanglement and/or wormholes, where its awareness is somehow smeared out over time? Like a completely different type of consciousness. And does a consciousness have to be made of atoms, or can it be made of light or space-time ripples or something else that we don't understand until we have a strong quantum gravity theory? So let's get frisky and presume that the answer to that question is, I guess, probably. So there is this idea in physics that says, given enough time, whatever can happen will eventually happen. So if a consciousness exponentially greater than our own can exist, well, then it does exist, at least according to Einstein, and how he showed with good evidence that the future and past both exist. And if Einstein's idea is correct, given enough time, consciousness of the future is vast and runs hyper-realistic ancestor simulations. The simulation hypothesis, that is, and the self-simulation hypothesis They both follow similar deductive logic trees, and they both use evidence as well. So let's run a little competition and kind of give points for the evidences. We have evidence. Computers in 2022 are doing very realistic simulations. So that's 1 point for the simulation hypothesis. And we have evidence that our dreams can do hyper-realistic simulations. Some of my most realistic experiences in life have been a few dreams that were just so real, I couldn't believe they were not when I woke up. So that's 1 point for the self-simulation hypothesis. We're tied. We have evidence that consciousness exists. That's 1 more point for the self-simulation hypothesis. We have evidence that computer simulations are evolving, getting better, more powerful. That's 1 more point for the simulation hypothesis. And we have evidence that consciousness is the result of an evolutionary process that has been getting more powerful over time. That's 1 more point for the self-simulation hypothesis. So it's a close race, right? So let's check in on the competing old school idea of materialism. Surprisingly, we have no evidence whatsoever that the philosophy of materialism is true. So no points. We have evidence in the form of quantum mechanics that the theory of reality being made of information is true. So evidence is not proof. Implications are not proof. But quantum mechanics does imply, for some, for many, that reality may be information theoretic, in the words of John Wheeler. And that answer right there was interesting. In other words, we have evidence that reality is made of information. So that's interesting because that is a point for the self-simulation hypothesis, but it is not a point for the simulation hypothesis. Because people who believe that reality is made of information, like John Wheeler, are not materialists. So let's take score. We're now at 3 points for the self-simulation hypothesis, 2 points for the simulation hypothesis, and 0 points for the materialism hypothesis. Conclusion, for me, it is more likely than not that we are in an ancestor simulation within an unimaginable form of future consciousness that self-actualizes or self-simulates both us, its ancestors, and itself, our uber descendant that emerged from us. But there's some ambiguity, I'll admit and articulate, with 3 questions. What is information? What is meaning? And can either of those words exist without consciousness? So information itself is meaning. It's always meaning. So for the first question, we can answer information is meaning, period. Okay, but what is meaning? Meaning is the behavior of consciousness. It's challenging to argue something is information if you cannot deal with the word meaning. And unfortunately, it is impossible to discuss the term meaning outside a system containing an entity capable of ascribing or actualizing meaning. Consciousness is the actualizer, ascriber, or creator of meaning. Meaning is what consciousness does. You can kind of think of meaning as the verb form of the noun consciousness. There is simply no good rationale for the viewpoint of a foundational building block of reality, such as energy, that is not itself information. Humanity's most powerful theory thus far is quantum mechanics, and as mentioned, it implies strongly that reality is made of information. It is therefore no surprise that we have this dirty little secret in the industry of fundamental physics called the measurement problem. So before we cover the measurement problem, let's be clear. Anyone who claims to understand quantum theory is either lying or crazy, or doesn't understand it in the first place. No one understands quantum mechanics. So there will be trolls and there will be haters who will post comments on this video that I am a crackpot for talking about consciousness in relation to quantum mechanics. Now, if I am a crackpot, then at least I'm in good company. Here are some things that a few titans of modern physics have said. Consciousness cannot be accounted for in physical terms, for consciousness is absolutely fundamental. The stuff of the world is mind stuff. These are two quotes in the context of the ontology of reality, not some poetic side writings of these guys. We do not find obvious evidence of life or mind in so-called inert matter. But if the scientific point of view is correct, we shall ultimately find them, at least in rudimentary form, all through the universe. Rudimentary consciousness throughout the universe. Mind, or something of the nature as mind, must exist throughout the entire universe. This is, I believe, the truth. The laws of physics leave a place for mind in the description of every molecule. In other words, mind is already inherent in every electron, and the processes of human consciousness differ only in degree and not in kind. That which we experience as mind will, in a natural way, ultimately reach the level of the wave function and of the dance of the particles. There is no unbridgeable gap or barrier between any of these levels. It is implied that, in some sense, a rudimentary consciousness is present even at the level of particle physics. Is it utterly absurd to seek behind the ordering structures of this world a consciousness whose intentions were these very structures? In other words, I'll rephrase it in more modern language. Werner Heisenberg, who wrote down the first version of quantum mechanics before Schrödinger in the form of his matrix mathematical representation, is saying, is it crazy? And all these guys, by the way, are commenting within the context of the measurement problem, not just poetry writing here. Heisenberg is saying, is it crazy to think that quantum mechanics itself, the structures, right, of this world, are the intentions of this some type of consciousness stuff? And he's not talking about like human consciousness per se. The self-simulation hypothesis says that eventually a great mind can emerge. And because it can emerge, it eventually does emerge, and it's capable of running the mathematics, the algorithms that flow on those mathematics to bootstrap itself or to bootstrap reality into existence. Heisenberg's quote is the closest to the self-simulation hypothesis so far. Frank Wilczek, I was able to ask Frank Wilczek about this quote about a week ago with Fong and David at UC San Diego, and I was looking through my iPhone, going through one of the papers where I had written this quote, and I wanted to ask him about this quote, and I couldn't find it, so it didn't work. But he says the relevant literature on the meaning of quantum theory, it's famously contentious and obscure. Everybody argues about it, in other words. And I believe it'll remain that way. In other words, people are going to keep arguing about it until somebody comes along and constructs within the formalism of quantum mechanics, in other words, maybe a bolt-on but it has to sort of explain quantum mechanics or deal with quantum mechanics. So they have to come up with this quote-unquote observer. And what is in other words, you got to put an observer into quantum mechanics, in a sense, is what he's saying. And he's defining what the observer means. That is, a model entity whose states correspond to a recognizable caricature of conscious awareness. He's a Nobel laureate, did a lot of the work that gave us better understandings of hadron physics. It is likely that the new way of seeing things will astonish us. This is said in the context of the measurement problem. And this is physicist and author of Bell's theorem, which is all about the measurement problem. At one point, people thought that the physical reality was changing when we have awareness of it because of some physical interactions that we have to do with it in order to be aware of it, like shine light on something to see it, for example. I mean, he's a mathematical physicist, and he came up with a thought process on that later got converted into experimental physics and then validated. And it's really important. It's called Bell's theorem, and it kind of kills off some of the earlier arguments to dispel or wave off the measurement problem. But trust me, the measurement problem is still hotly debated, and people don't know what quantum mechanics means, and everybody's got their own viewpoint. It's a mess. And that's not what, say, general relativity is. General relativity doesn't have all these disagreements on what it means. And Feynman wouldn't have said nobody understands general relativity. Quantum mechanics is very different. The study of the universe and the study of consciousness will inseparably be linked, and that ultimate progress in the one will be impossible without progress in the other. The religion of materialism that rejects any foundational role for consciousness in fundamental physics, irregardless of what these titans of physics say and countless others, it will cause some zealots to be venomous. Like when you get haters that rail against me for talking about consciousness, or any physicist or person for talking about consciousness in the context of fundamental physics, you get people who get so mean and venomous that it's almost like religion, like dogma, like it's just, really? In fact, just pointing out the truth that materialism is a philosophy that is not undergirded by evidence in the scientific method will upset a heck of a lot of people watching this video. And of course, me calling it a religion will infuriate some. Now, with that said, let's unapologetically explain what the measurement problem is. When we have, or we can have, awareness of a physical system, it profoundly changes its behavior, as though the universe knows that we are observing a part of it and then changes its behavior as a result of us knowing that. It's spooky. The term problem is a pun. It's only a problem for the philosophy of materialism. Obviously, if you're a materialist who rejects consciousness as foundational, then physical things changing their behavior based on awareness that a consciousness can have about them is a big problem. On the other hand, if the self-simulation hypothesis were the correct scientific story, it would be a requirement that consciousness is fundamental, and it would not be a problem. So the other axiom or assumption required by the self-simulation hypothesis is that time and causality are non-local. In other words, the future can influence the past. We need the emergent pan-consciousness substrate that runs the math of the self-simulation to self-actualize or self-simulate itself into existence via a trans-temporal feedback loop with us and the rest of the past. So we have to loop a linear causal chain into a circle where the simulation simple program code lives in the mind of the emergent pan-consciousness substrate at the top of an evolutionary hierarchy or an emergent hierarchy, and where the pan-consciousness substrate self-actualizes itself to emerge from the code that we recognize as the physical universe around us. In terms of logically self-consistent explanatory power, the self-simulation hypothesis leaves fewer paradoxes and troubling questions than the simulation hypothesis. This is because the simulation hypothesis is grounded in a classical picture of linear time or causality and is steeped in the ancient Greek philosophy of materialism.